Chapter 10, Part 1 of Aircraft and Submarines by Willis J. Abbott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. Some Features of Aerial Warfare, Part 1. As devices to translate German hate for England into deeds of bloody malignancy and cowardly murder, the German aircraft have ranked supreme. The ruthless submarine war has indeed done something toward working off this peculiar passion, but it lacked the spectacular qualities which German wrath demanded. As the war proceeded, and it became apparent that the participation of Great Britain, at first wholly unexpected by the Kaiser's advisers, was certain to defeat the German aims, the authorities carefully inculcated in the minds of the people the most malignant hatred for that power. As Lissauer's famous hymn of hate had it, "French and Russians it matters not, a blow for a blow and a shot for a shot. We have one foe and one alone, England." By way of at once gratifying this hatred, and still further stimulating it, the German military authorities began early in the war a series of air raids upon English towns. They were of more than doubtful military value. They damaged no military or naval works. They aroused the savage ire of the British people, who saw their children slain in schools and their wounded in hospitals by bombs dropped from the sky, and straightway rushed off to enlist against so callous and barbaric a foe. But the raids served their political purpose by making the German people believe that the British were suffering all the horrors of war on their own soil, while the iron line of trenches drawn across France by the German troops kept the invader and war's agonies far from the soil of the fatherland. The first German air raids were by Zeppelins on little English seaside towns, Scarborough, Hartlepool, and Harwich. Except in so far as they inflicted mutilation and death upon many non-combatants, mostly women and children, and misery upon their relatives and friends, they were without effect. But early in 1915 began a systematic series of raids upon London, which, by October of 1917, had totaled 34, with a toll of 865 persons killed and 2,500 wounded. It seems fair to say that for these raids there was more plausible excuse than for those on the peaceful little seaside bathing resorts and fishing villages. London is full of military and naval centers, arsenals and navy yards, executive offices and centers of warlike activity. An incendiary bomb dropped into the Bank of England or the Admiralty might paralyze the finances of the empire or throw the naval organization into a state of anarchy. But as a matter of fact, the German bombs did nothing of the sort. They fell in the congested districts of London, the crowded warrens of the poor. They spread wounds and death among peaceable theater audiences. One dropped on a bus loaded with passengers homeward bound, and obliterated it and them from the face of the earth. But no building of the least military importance sustained any injury. It is true, however, that the persistent raiding has compelled England to withhold from the fighting lines in France several thousand men and several hundred guns in order to be in readiness to meet air raids in which Germany has never employed more than 50 machines at most 200 men, including both aviators and mechanics. It is entirely probable that the failure of the Germans to strike targets of military importance and the slaughter they wrought among peaceful civilians were due to no intent or purpose on their part. Hitting a chosen target from the air is no matter of certainty. The bomb intended for the railway station is quite as likely to hit the adjacent public school or hospital. If the world ever recurs to that moderate degree of sanity and civilization which shall permit wars, but strive to regulate them in the interest of humanity, this untrustworthiness of the aircraft's aim will compel some form of international regulation, just as the vulnerability of the submarine will force the amendment of the doctrine of visitation and search. But neither problem can be logically and reasonably solved in the middle of a war. And so, while the German violation of existing international law had the uncomfortable result for Germany of bringing the United States into the war, the barbarous raids upon London caused the British at last to turn aside from their commendable abstention from air raids on unfortified and non-military towns and prepare for reprisals in kind. From the beginning of the war, the British had abstained from bombing peaceful and non-military towns. They had not indeed been weak in the employment of their air forces. General Smuts, speaking in October 1917, said that the British had, in the month previous, dropped 207 tons of bombs behind the lines of the enemy. But the targets were airdromes, military camps, arsenals, and munitions camps, not hospitals or kindergartens. The time had now come when this purely military campaign no longer satisfied an enraged British people who demanded the enforcement of the Mosaic law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, against a people whom General Smuts described as an enemy who apparently recognizes no laws, human or divine, who knows no pity or restraint, who sung Te Deums over the sinking of the Lusitania, and to whom the maiming and slaughter of women and children appear legitimate means of warfare. And Premier Lloyd George, speaking to an audience of poor people in one of the congested districts which had suffered sorely from the aerial activities of the Hun, said, "We will give it all back to them, and we will give it soon. We shall bomb Germany with compound interest." But whether undertaken as part of a general program of frightfulness or as reprisals for cruel and indefensible outrages, air raids upon defenseless towns, killing peaceable citizens in their beds and children in their kindergartens, are not incidents to add glory to aviation. The mind turns with relief from such examples of the cruel misuse of aircraft to the hosts of individual instances in which the airman and his machine remind one of the doughty Sir Knight and his charger in the most gallant days of chivalry. There were hosts of such incidents, men who fought gallantly and who always fought fair, men who hung about the outskirts of an aerial battle waiting for some individual champion of their own choosing to show himself and join in battle to death in the high ranges of the sky. Some of these have been mentioned in this book already. To discuss all who even as early as 1917 had made their names memorable would require a volume in itself. A few may well be mentioned below. There, for example, was Captain Georges Guynemer, king of the French aces. An ace is an aviator who has brought down 5 enemy aircraft. Guynemer had 53 to his credit. Still a youth, only 23 years of age at the time of his death, and only flying for 21 months, he had lived out several lifetimes in the mad excitement of combat in midair. Within 3 weeks after getting his aviator's license, he had become an ace. Before his first year's service had expired, he was decorated and promoted for gallantry in rushing to the aid of a comrade attacked by 5 enemy machines. He entered the combat at the height of 10,000 feet, and inside of 2 minutes had dropped 2 of the enemy. The others fled. He pursued hotly, keeping up a steady fire with his machine gun. One Boche wavered and fell, but just then an enemy shell from an Archie far below exploded under Guynemer, tearing away one wing of his machine. Let him tell the rest of that story. "I felt myself dropping," he said later. "It was 10,000 feet to the earth, and, like a flash, I saw my funeral with my saddened comrades marching behind the gun carriage to the cemetery. But I pulled and pushed every lever I had, but nothing would check my terrific descent. 5,000 feet from the earth, the wrecked machine began to turn somersaults, but I was strapped into the seat. I do not know what it was, but something happened and I felt the speed descent lessen. But suddenly there was a tremendous crash, and when I recovered my senses I had been taken from the wreckage and was all right." 2 records Guynemer made which have not yet been surpassed. The first, the one described above of dropping 3 Fokkers in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and rounding off the adventure by himself dropping 10,000 feet. The second was in shooting down 4 enemy machines in 1 day. His methods were of the simplest. He was always alone in his machine, which was the lightest available. He would rather carry more gasoline and ammunition than take along a gunner. The machine gun was mounted on the plane above his head, pointing dead ahead, and aimed by aiming the whole airplane. Once started, the gun continued firing automatically, and Guynemer's task was to follow his enemy pitilessly, keeping that lead-spitting muzzle steadily bearing upon him. In September 1917 he went up to attack 5 enemy machines. No odds, however appalling, seemed to terrify him, but was caught in a fleet of nearly 40 Boches and fell to earth in the enemy's country. One of the last of the air duels to be fought under the practices which made early air service so vividly recall the age of chivalry was that in which Captain Immelman, the Falcon of the German army, met Captain Ball of the British Royal Flying Corps. Immelman had a record of 51 British airplanes downed. Captain Ball was desirous of wiping out this record and the audacious German at the same time, and so flying over the German lines he dropped this letter: Captain Immelman, I challenge you to a man-to-man fight to take place this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I will meet you over the German lines. Have your anti-aircraft guns withhold their fire while we decide which is the better man. The British guns will be silent. Ball. Presently thereafter this answer was dropped from a German airplane: Captain Ball, your challenge is accepted. The guns will not interfere. I will meet you promptly at 2. Immelman. The word spread far and wide along the trenches on both sides. Tacitly all firing stopped as though the bugles had sung truce. Men left cover and clambered up on the top to watch the duel. Punctually both flyers rose from their lines and made their way down no man's land. Let an eyewitness tell the story. From our trenches there were wild cheers for Ball. The Germans yelled just as vigorously for Immelman. The cheers from the trenches continued. The Germans increased in volume. Ours changed into cries of alarm. Ball, thousands of feet above us and only a speck in the sky, was doing the craziest things imaginable. He was below Immelman and was apparently making no effort to get above him, thus gaining the advantage of position. Rather, he was swinging around this way and that, attempting, it seemed, to postpone the inevitable. We saw the German's machine dip over preparatory to starting the nose dive. "He's gone now," sobbed a young soldier at my side, for he knew Immelman's gun would start its raking fire once it was being driven straight down. Then, in a fraction of a second, the tables were turned. Before Immelman's plane could get into firing position, Ball drove his machine into a loop, getting above his adversary and cutting loose with his gun and smashing Immelman's by a hail of bullets as he swept by. Immelman's airplane burst into flames and dropped. Ball, from above, followed for a few hundred feet and then straightened out and raced for home. He settled down, rose again, hurried back, and released a huge wreath of flowers, almost directly over the spot where Immelman's charred body was being lifted from a tangled mass of metal. 4 days later, Ball, too, was killed. But the Germans, too, had their champion airmen, mighty flyers, skillful at control and with the machine gun, in whose triumphs they took the same pride that our boys in France did in those of Chapman, Rockwell, or Thaw, the British in Warneford, or the French in Guynemer. Chief of these was Captain Bolke, who came to his death in the latter part of 1917. After putting to his credit over 60 Allied planes brought down, a German account of one of his duels as watched from the trenches will be of interest. For quite a long time an Englishman had been making circles before our eyes, calmly and deliberately. My men on duty clenched their fists in impotent wrath. The dog! Shooting would do no good. Then suddenly from the rear a harsh, deep singing and buzzing cuts the air. It sounds like a German flyer, but he is not yet visible. Only the buzz of an approaching motor is heard in the clouds in the direction of the Englishman. More than 100 eyes scan the horizon. There, far away and high among the clouds, is a small black hummingbird, a German battle aeroplane. Its course is laid directly for the hostile biplane, and it flies like an arrow shot with a clear eye and steady hand. My men crawl out of the shelters. I adjust my field glasses. A lump rises in our throats as if we are awaiting something new and wonderful. So far the other does not seem to have noticed or recognized the black flyer that already is poised as a hawk above him. All at once there is a mighty swoop through the air like the drop of a bird of prey, and in no time the black flyer is immediately over the Englishman and the air is filled with the furious crackling of a machine gun, followed by the rapid ta-ta-ta of 2 or 3 more, all operated at the highest speed just as during a charge. The Englishman drops a little, makes a circle, and tries to escape toward the rear. The other circles and attacks him in front, and again we hear the exciting ta-ta-ta. Now the Englishman tries to slip from under his opponent, but the German makes a circle and the effort fails. Then the enemy describes a great circle and attempts to rise above the German. The latter ascends in sharp half circles and again swoops down upon the biplane, driving it toward the German trenches. Will the Englishman yield so soon? Scattered shouts of joy are already heard in our ranks. Suddenly he drops 100 yards and more through the air and makes a skillful loop toward the rear. Our warrior of the air swoops after him, tackles him once more, and again we hear the wild, defiant rattle of the machine guns over our heads. Now they are quite close to our trenches. The French infantry and artillery begin firing in a last desperate hope. Neither of them is touched. Sticking close above and behind him, the German drives the Englishman along some 600 yards over our heads and then just above the housetops of St. A. Once more we hear a distant ta-ta-ta, a little slower and more scattered, and then as they drop both disappear from our view. Scarcely 5 minutes pass before the telephone brings up the news. Lieutenant Boelke has just brought down his 7th flyer. Methods of air fighting were succinctly described in a hearing before the Senate Committee on Military Affairs in June 1917. The officers testifying were young Americans of the Lafayette Escadrille of the French Army. To the civilian the testimony is interesting for the clear idea it gives of military aviation. The extracts following are from the official record. Adjutant Prince: Senator, there are about 4 kinds of machines used abroad on the Western Front today. The machines that Adjutant Rumsey and myself are looking after are called the battle machines. Then there are the photography machines, machines that go up to enable the taking of photographs of the German batteries, go back of the lines and take views of the country behind their lines and find out what their next line of attack will be, or, if they retreat from the present line, then everything in that way. Probably we have, where we are, in my group alone, 150 photographers who do nothing all day long except develop pictures. And you can get pictures of any part of the country that you want. When the Germans retreated from the old line where they used to be, by Peronne and Chaulnes, we had absolute pictures of all the Hindenburg line from where they are now, right down to the St. Quentin, down to the line the French are on. We had photographs of it all. Senator Kirby: When they started on the retreat? Adjutant Prince: Yes, sir. So we knew exactly where their stand would be made. Then, besides that, those photograph machines do a lot of scouting. They have a pilot and a photographer aboard. He has not only a camera, but quite often he has a Lewis gun with him in order to ward off any hostile airmen if they should get through the battle planes that are above him. In other words, should get through us in order to fight him. They do a great deal of the scouting because they fly at a lower level. The battle planes go up to protect photography machines, or to go man hunting, as it is called. In other words, to fight the Germans. We fly all day, like today, as high as we can go, or as high as the French go as a rule, about 5,500 meters, about 17,000 to 18,000 feet. Adjutant Rumsey: I think 5,500 meters is about 19,000 feet. Some go up 6,000 meters, which makes about 20,000 feet. Adjutant Prince: We go up there and we have a certain sector of the front to look after. If we are only man hunting, we go backward and forward like a policeman to prevent the Germans from getting over our own lines. We usually fly by 4s if we can, and the 4 go out together so as not to be alone. We are usually fighting inside of the German lines, because the morale of the French and English is better than that of the Germans today. And every fight I have had, I have never been lucky enough to have one inside of my own lines. They have all been inside of the German lines. Senator Kirby: What is the equipment of a battle plane such as you use? Adjutant Prince: I use the 180 horsepower machine. It is called a SPAD, which has a Spanish motor. But a great many of the motors today are being built here in America. Senator Kirby: How many men do you carry? Adjutant Prince: We go up alone in these machines. We did have 2 guns. We had the Lewis gun on our upper wing and the Vickers down below that shoots through the propeller as the propeller turns around. Then we gave up the Lewis above. It added more weight and we did not need it so much. The trouble with the Lewis gun is that it has only 97 cartridges, while the Vickers has 500, and you can do just as much damage with the Vickers as you could with them both. Senator Sutherland: You drive and fight at the same time? Adjt. Prince: Yes, sir. Adjt. Rumsey: The machine gun is fixed. Adjt. Prince: It is absolutely fixed on the machine, and if I should want to adjust it to shoot you, I would adjust my machine on you. The witness then took up the nature and work of some of the heavier machines. He testified: Adjt. Prince: Then comes the artillery regulating machine. That machine goes up, and it may be a Farman or a bimotor or some other kind of heavier machine, a machine that goes slowly. They go over a certain spot. They have a driver, who is a pilot like ourselves. Then they have an artillery officer on board, whose sole duty it is to send back word, mostly by Marconi, to his battery where the shots are landing. He will say, "Too far, too short, right or left," and he stays there over this battery until the work done by the French guns has been absolutely controlled, and above him he has some of these battle planes keeping him from being attacked from above by German airmen. Of course they may be shot at by anti-aircraft guns, which you cannot help. That is artillery regulating. The Chairman: Are you always attacking from above? Adjt. Prince: By airplanes, yes, sir. It is always much safer to attack from above. Then you have the bomb-dropping machines, which carry a lot of weight. They go out sometimes in the daytime, but mostly at night. And they have these new sights by which they can stay up quite high in the air and still know the spot they are going at. They know the wind speed, they know their height, and they can figure out by this new arrangement they have exactly when the time is to let go their bombs. Senator Kirby: Something in the nature of a range-finder? Adjt. Prince: A sort of range-finder. Adjt. Rumsey: It is a sort of telescope that looks down between your legs, and you have to regulate yourself, observing your speed, and when you see the spot you have to touch a button and off go these things. Adjt. Rumsey: In a raid my brother went on there were 68 machines that left, the French heavy machines, the English heavy machines, and then the English sort of half fighting machine and half bombing machine. They call it a Sopwith, and it is a very good machine. They went over there, and the first ones over were the Frenchmen, and they dropped bombs on these Mauser works, and the only thing that the English saw was a big cloud of smoke and dust, and they could not see the works, so they just dropped into them. Out of that raid the fighting machines got 8 Germans and dropped them, and the Germans got 8 Frenchmen. So out of 68 they lost 8. But we also got 8 Germans and dropped 6 tons of this stuff, which is 20 times as strong as the melinite. We do not know what the name of the powder is. The fighting machines on that trip only carried gasoline for 2 hours, and the other ones carried it for something like 6 hours, so we escorted them out for an hour, came back to our lines, filled up with gasoline, went out and met them and brought them back over the danger zone. Adjt. Prince: Near the trenches is where the danger zone is, because there the German fighting machines are located. Senator Kirby: How far was it from your battle front that you went? Adjt. Rumsey: I think it was about 500 miles, 250 there and 250 back. It was between 200 and 250 miles there. Senator Kirby: Beyond the battle front? Adjt. Rumsey: Yes, or to be more accurate, I think it was nearer 200 than 250. The Chairman: What do you think of the function of the airplane as a determining factor? Adjt. Prince: There is no doubt that if we could send over in huge waves a great number of these bomb-dropping machines and simply lay the country waste, for instance the big cities like Strasburg, Freiburg and others, not only would the damage done be great, but I guess the popular opinion in Germany, everything being laid waste, would work very strongly in the minds of the public toward having peace. I do not think you could destroy an army, because you could not see them, but you could go to different stations. You could go to Strasburg, to Brussels, and places like that. The Chairman: Then sending them over in enormous numbers would also put out of business their airplanes, and they would be helpless, would they not? Adjt. Prince: Absolutely. You not only have on the front a large number of bomb-dropping machines, but a large number of fighting machines. When the Somme battle was started in the morning, the Germans knew naturally that the French and British were going to start the Somme drive, and they had up these Drachens, these observation balloons, and the first 18 minutes that the battle started, the French and the English, I think, got 21 saucisses. In other words, over the next 5 days there was not a single German who came anywhere near the lines, where the French and English could go ahead as they felt like. Admiral Peary: have you any idea as to how many airplanes there are along that western front on the German side? Adjt. Prince: there must be about 3,000 on that line in actual commission. Admiral Peary: that means then about 10,000 in all, at least? Adjt. Prince: I should think so. I should say the French have about 2,000 and the English possibly 1,000, or we have almost 2,500. Adjt. Rumsey: if they have 3,000 we have 4,000, that is, right on the line. Adjt. Prince: we have about 1,000 more than they have, and we are up all the time. The day before I left the front I was called to go out 5 times, and I went out 5 times and spent 2 hours every time I went out. End of Some Features of Aerial Warfare, Part 1. Recording by William Tomko.